Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalization. So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, welcome back. It's the Karma Koala podcast. And today I've got Kwasi Anokye on, and I hope I pronounced your surname properly, Kwasi, on the other end of the Zoom. And I noticed he's just written a paper on Rastafarianism and legal issues in cannabis globally. And I've been following the cases in South Africa, in Kenya, and a couple of other places in Africa. And there's also been obviously legal issues in, obvious places like Jamaica. And Kwasi's going to tell them much better than I know, but what role does the Rastafarian community play in legal changes in the US as well? And I think that's really important because if you watched, I posted the videos of the Kenyan court cases, and if you watch those cases, you watch that video, it was fantastic because the most patient and relaxed people in the room were the people giving the testimonies about cannabis and why it should be used as a legal sacrament. So I'm really interested in talking to Kwasi about his paper and about the movement. The Rastafarians have been talking about using cannabis as a sacrament since the early 1960s in Jamaica, when Haile Selassie first visited. And then it all got wrapped up in popular culture, Bob Marley and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's far more serious than that. And I see these cases as they come to court in these various jurisdictions, that the Rastafarian community are the only people really interested in talking about creating an environment for cannabis that works for people, not for business. So I'm really interested in Kwasi's opinions on that and the work that he's been doing. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. Interesting work you're doing. I'm very excited about what you're doing. I just listened to some of your interviews and I see where you're going is what we need, right? You just said something about Rasta people being the ones who've championed it away from the commercialization thing, right? Yeah. Yes, that's true. And I like how you said it started out one way, and then when it became more like part of pop culture, something else happened. But we also got to bear in mind that something else has happened to the advocacy, right, among ourselves. And when we're speaking, before we started engaging with the state, it was just like free the herb, right? Just leave us alone. Let's smoke the herb, right? Yeah. Okay. Then we started to want to make sense to the world. Now you have to, interface with government, with the state, right? You're taking the courts and all that. So you got to find the language.
You've got to find the language. You've always got to find the language.
Yes. So I was just thinking about how the language of legalization came into it, right? I feel like that's something that has to be paid attention to. Where did it start? Where did the whole problem start, right? We can go back to 1925, that meeting they had. Yeah. Second Opium Conference. Yeah. Yep. And over there, something interesting is happening, right? So Egypt comes there, set up by South Africa, apartheid South Africa, but they went there at a meeting. Egypt shows up and has this whole argument to make, saying that, ganja is a problem, right? I'm sure you've read the records of the deliberations in around that conference, right? And you notice that there were moments where, like a subcommittee's report, I think Subcommittee F's report would say something like, it'd be impossible to prohibit marijuana in Africa, right? Because it's part of the culture there, right? Then you got the French delegate, I think his name was Bourgeoisie. I don't know how they say it in French, or bourgeois or something. Bourgeois. Yeah, bourgeois. Yeah. He said a similar thing. He was talking about the Congo. He said, "These people, you can't." He said, "Maybe what like the committee's report, the subcommittee's report, and bourgeois report, both were saying you could do this in the industrialized world, global north. Let's use that language now. I'm glad you used global south early on. But if you bring this down to Africa, it's not going to work, right? And,
Yeah, I mean, it's like trying to ban beer in Britain. You're in fantasy land.
absolutely, but those were the colonial times where you had governments that did not relate to the people. It was like, you're going to do this. We want this, right? Unfortunately, the post-colonial world is not very different. You just have different people,
Different people, same language.
channeling the same voice.
This is a part of my argument is we're using 20th century language in the 21st century, and we need to redefine the language used for 21st century conditions and 21st century language, whether that be defining these things in the English language or multiple languages. But the language of law from the 20th century does not fit what law is becoming in the 21st century.
Absolutely. And I love where you're going with that. So I just want to just zip forward to, so that's what happened. They're admitting that you can't prohibit this thing. And just remember that around 1934, and when they're talking in 1925, it sounded like this is a native problem in Africa or the darker peoples of the planet, right? But by 34, League of Nations had a report out that was saying that, hey, this thing's in Europe too, right? We have a problem here, right? Okay, but let's just move forward. The point I'm trying to get at is, so this situation, the idea that it can be prohibited has been laid down, and of course it got overwritten, right? Over time, we get a 1961 treaty, the 71, and then the 88 treaties. Yeah, and they all are moving in the direction of prohibition, right? But there's always this little, I want to say, caveat in there, or this admission that it doesn't really apply to people for whom this is an integral part of their culture, right? All right. So we're talking about language, right? So legalization is the language of global northness.
Well,
right?
It's the language of power, isn't it? And it's the language of capital.
Wow, interesting. Interesting for you to touch on that. But the people that are using the term legalized marijuana, I think they were going up against the system. So it's coming out of U.S. counterculture thing, right?
Yeah.
So they were like, we're rebelling against the system. But they used the language. I don't want to read too much into it,
It's just the language they know. And look, from my perspective, I grew up in the global north. I'm British, but all North Americans of a certain type seem to presume that cannabis is essentially something out of US culture. It's not ancient cultures from Africa, throughout the Hindu Kush, throughout Nepal, throughout Thailand, and all the way down to Australia and beyond. I mean, this is they have these assumptions that they decide they decide how to prohibit, and they also decide how to legalize, and both
exactly
with their language and their culture. And that doesn't even apply if you live in the Lebanon, or if you live in the United Kingdom, or if you live in other parts of any part of the world. So for me, it's a major issue, because the US presumes that all knowledge about cannabis, and I haven't even mentioned Central and South America, comes out of essentially a Californian mindset. And I think we need to turn those ideas on their head as quickly as possible, because through legal systems, that's how they're beginning to recontrol it in a different fashion.
Totally agree. Just to pick up from where you left off. So Rasta people start using the language of legalization, right? So 76, Tosh has this album on, Peter Tosh, right? Tosh wants them to leave us alone. That's it. He brings them on the stage. He's not caring about the law. He's not interested in going to court to argue a case, but he just wanted them to leave us alone, right? So 76, he has legalized it out. Why? Because that was the language in the world around that time. That was but let's just face it, most of the words we're using now for what we're doing are the available words or available, conceptual vocabularies that a lot of people use, right? The dominant.
That was exactly right.
Because you just want people to understand you, right?
Yeah,
You
of
don't
course he
want to
does.
go
I mean,
start talking to
he's
someone.
he's a cultural message sharer, and that's
Yes.
if you're a songwriter, I mean, that's how that's when I was 15 years old. Of course,
I hear you.
that's what introduced me for me to understand. Him and Lee
Absolutely.
Scratch Perry, those two individuals introduced me to
Whoa.
understanding the language behind this.
Yes, but they were using a term that sounded like what they wanted to say.
Yeah.
And I'll just explain. So Tosh has that out. We all start saying legalize it, and we're still saying it till today. Most of us. 87, 1987, he releases "Not Go to Jail." Right. The first one and Bush Doctor after that sound like, yeah, I want to deal with this problem. Let's talk it out. More or less, it's like I'm deferring to the state. Right. Yeah, legalize it for me. Allow me to smoke my herb legally, right? And I'm telling you about the benefits, and all that. That's this thing here we can have a conversation about. But when we go to not go to jail, of course he's having a conversation about who's using the herb for the most part over there, right? But he's telling you he's not going to go to jail again. The first one sounds like, okay, yeah, what you say can happen. I'm getting you to. I mean, things more or less depend on your goodwill now, right?
Yeah.
And now he's over here saying, "Not go to jail." Like, yeah. And I mean, when a man says, "I'm not doing this," it's another. I mean, think of a man like Tosh already, right? So, at that point, started out for me after thinking about this for a while. Later, though, we started to realize that the legalization language is not only inadequate; it is problematic. Like you just hinted a few moments ago, right? It allows other forces to come in and actually allows you compromise the original vision and you allow someone else to do. Because I'm sure we'll talk about this in a second. It was happening everywhere in the post-legalization world, right? In the global south. Let's talk about Africa, right? And Jamaica, right? The cops still coming in to arrest the people's spaces and arresting them.
Well, that's exactly right. And
I want us to talk about
South Africa is a perfect example. So they created the right under the Constitution to use cannabis and the herb in a private situation. That's fine if you're middle class or wealthy and have a house, but it creates a lot of legal questions if you
for most people.
For most people, if you come from other parts of society where those concepts of privacy don't exist and the police decide what is private, not the individual.
Exactly. So there were cases where soon after they said, okay, we're going to okay this, right? More or less, word was out that, don't arrest people for ganja, right, in South Africa. But it kept on happening. So the police boss had to put out a moratorium, more or less like, that, hey, don't cops don't do this, right? And then when you read it closely, he's saying we're going to get in trouble. Not so much because he thinks it's okay for ganja people to be free. He said people can start suing us, more or less. We don't want that, right? So right there, you realize our interests are not the same. Someone would say, oh, he wrote a letter. He told this cop his force to not mess with Rasta people. That thing didn't hold because it kept on harassing Rasta people. So in 2024, what's the man's name? President of South Africa.
Ramaphosa.
Yes, he signed a document that said was legal, right?
Yeah, the day before the election.
Exactly.
To the last moment.
But isn't it interesting that just before that, between the time, I think, 2018, 2017, I think 2018, coming to, just within that period, Rasta people, some Rasta people were really complaining about this law. Not just even Rasta people. And the ganja community was like, man, this thing's not because they saw a draft of the bill, right? It was released and the public was supposed to come and look at it and comment, right? There were people who were like someone like Jeremy Acton, the DACA party.
Yeah.
He was like, don't. I mean, if you allow this to happen as a war on ganja people, he called it a war, something people would be celebrating, like, oh, they used to, disrespect us for ganja leaf. Now they're considering it. And now they're even saying that we could smoke it. Right. But he's saying, no, this is going to be a problem. He was talking about it like it was an offensive they were launching. He says it was a declaration of war. He uses the word fascist war in there, all that, right? So he's thinking about it in a certain, which I think has to be taken seriously, So that's there were people. I read from someone who was saying, "Hey, what does it mean for you to say you can have more than this many ounces, right?" So it means that if I come visit you and I'm leaving and you put your hand in your stuff and you give me some, and this happens to be 1 ounce more than the accepted amount, right? And then I get my ride, I'm going home, and the cop stops me and he sees that he can just take me. Just 1 ounce that I didn't know about. It's in numbers, it's in logic, right? Plus colonial still, right? So right there, you see that the thing doesn't make sense. They didn't want, where people were like, no, this thing is dangerous. But some people were like, oh man, we didn't have anything, at least we got something,
Which is always a bad road. That's the wrong fork in the path to take.
But that's the problem we're dealing with ganja. That's the problem we're dealing with right now with ganja. So there's another track that is emerging. It's always been there. I think it's linked to the original desire, which is to remove the law altogether from all. I was about to say it's going to be global. We know it's going to be global, but just remove the law from whatever Narcotics Act or Dangerous Drugs Act.
This is exactly the discussions I want to be having at my conference in a couple of weeks' time, because I've got a couple of lawyers who are talking about essentially they're talking about cognitive liberty, and you just you want to remove and I've spoken to a couple of academics and just rip up the schedules. They don't exist. They
exactly, and we can say why.
They're past their sell-by date.
And even they didn't even make sense. They were just, they were just made up stuff.
Yeah, exactly. They never made sense in the first place, but they make less sense 80 years later.
Absolutely. So I like how you're saying that because some people use the word, it's cliche now, abolition, right? Abolish cannabis prohibition. There's a campaign that's been launched in Ghana, mainly by the Rastafari Council of Ghana.
That's right. I've been following that. Yeah, I've been following that.
And they're trying to connect with, forces all over the world. So, hey, it's good to know you. I'll let them know, and all that. Yes. So the whole idea is they've worked through these ideas.
Well, this is what interests me, because I think, in all of this, the Rasta communities in different parts of the world are taking this issue far more seriously than anybody else. And it becomes more than a religious sacramental act, but you're acting.
Thank you.
But you're actually acting for everybody else. And
why?
And why should you be? It should actually be the reverse situation, because the Rasta communities are the ones who have been suffering under the law for nigh on 100 years because of these issues. So it just really interests me how we've made everything topsy-turvy, and then
but this is not about just peace and love and we love humanity. For me, that's not what it means at all. It's just what I'm trying to go for, what I want, what we want. What we wanted when we left that first split the first time was nobody should be bothering me. I don't need any cop messing with me, right? That's how we feel almost every time you sit down with your brothers and sisters. You're blazing alone. You're like, there's no reason why I should be messed with. That's your original feeling. That's a real statement. Now, if I start talking to people, as soon as I walk out of my house and I start talking to someone and I think they have a different frame of reference, or even at home, right? It's likely I will start to adjust my language a little bit and start using words that is like, oh yeah, we're talking about marijuana, but oh, if only the government could, what's the word? Legalize it, right? Or decriminalize it. But that's not what I really want to say. I just said that thing shouldn't exist. But if I
Exactly.
say that
It
to
shouldn't
him, it will
exist in the
sound,
first place, and you shouldn't be
yeah,
drawn in to that language of power. See, I love having these conversations. I think they're really
me too.
important. They're really
Yeah,
important because 95% of people aren't aware of the conversation. So you have to start explaining or talking to them, not explaining, that's the wrong word, talking to them uh, and trying to get them to understand a new language in a new century.
yes. So two things are happening there that I can hear you. So there's a need, right? There's a need to relate, right? Which is a Trojan horse if we're serious about this, right? If I say, oh, I want to relate, what we're going to do is, once I say this is legalization, I'm going to try to make that make sense. So now I'm going to go read all these things about legalization. It becomes a belief system
Yeah.
or a belief. Like, this is what you're supposed to be doing so the ganja will be free. But that's someone's concoction. Like I was saying, it's not a global northern thing among people who are not facing what the Rastaman was facing at all. You know what I mean? These are white guys, like the
Well,
guy that set up.
and this is another argument that I have because I see all around the world people say, oh, in America, they've legalized it. We'll just look at how they've legalized it. And they don't understand the US political system that to get legislation, you spend money and you have people persuade your elected, representatives through money to create something. And if money is used to create that, the reason they're doing it is to make themselves more money. So it's a completely, I think, a crazy way to look at freeing the plant, essentially.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you're speaking, I was just thinking about how big these money people want the thing to sell, right? They were pushing a legalization campaign, actually. They took it, over the edge.
They want to sell something. They want to sell something.
And you know what they were doing? The main trope they were using, someone has done some academic paper on that, was the clean white guy middle class guy who never gets in trouble. Oh, I smoke marijuana and I'm a good person. You know what I mean? College student, getting ready for that, whatever, Wall Street job or Silicon Valley job or whatever, maybe not. But basically the safe character. To make sure that those are the kind of public service announcements we're making visually, right? This is talking about ganja, and you see this,
Yeah, it's
benign,
all on its
benign
head.
figure.
But that's the reality that's being created. And when I look at when people talk about these issues, they're not talking about this issue at all. There's conferences all over the world now about cannabis.
Yeah.
Every single one, bar none, is about cannabis and money and cannabis and power structures.
Wow,
And then if you read everything, it's all the same conversation, except for a few academics like yourself and a few others around the world who will step outside that and discuss in cultural terms, but also, in serious trying to understand how you unravel a Western legal system construct on something that is a cultural right for people all over the planet. And
I like that.
And I think that it's really important to work out how to start having that discussion with other people. And because ideas are new ideas take a long time to take hold. If I go back to how you discussing Tosh's first album and legalizing the herb, that's how I first heard it. So that's how I thought about it for many years, because I the people I listened to most seriously weren't politicians or business people. They were people who wrote or sang about these issues. They were trapped within that world because
by the way,
there's no other way to get it out.
By the way, I love how you start your show, the sounds you play. I just had to throw that down. Sorry. So I was like, I don't want to forget about that.
And it's all about the sounds. As a
The
small
music
kid,
you were playing.
I grew up in the BVI.
Yeah.
I didn't hear reggae a lot. It was more jump up, and it was still. But I grew up with that culture. And then
Yeah.
when I went back to the UK in the early 70s and was a young teenager, we had two things. We had punk music and we had reggae music, and both of those cultures taught us to fight and resist the existing paradigm of how alternative culture was thought about. And as time goes on, those two forms of culture inform the way that I think, literally more than anything else. People say, "Oh, you should grow out of listening to the music," but that's what gives you a political and critical base of understanding of how to think
Absolutely.
about these problems.
Absolutely. And so like I feel the same way about touch. I take it very seriously. And so just imagine, and we've not been exposed to even a question of the extent to which, like, there's a case in St. Kitts, right? The case that triggered the move towards legalization of sacramental marijuana. I'd like to talk about the sacramental difficulty if you want us to. On what he said, he's the one that's made a decision that, hey, free this guy, free this Rasta man. He had a case, right? And he was like, I'm Rasta, it's like my sacramental use. And he made a good case. And actually, Judge Ventos is saying that the South African thing inspired him, right? While we're looking at some South African thing as problematic, at least he got something up with it and applied it here in a very serious way. One thing he said at the end of the case was, when he was making his decision was, marijuana use is not something that should be or can or must be legislated. More or less, it's like this is outside the purview of the state, right? This is a judge talking. So this is like fundamental freedom.
Well, I think this is why I'm still a fundamental fan of common law, because common law was originally in the United Kingdom and England all about land rights and giving people rights. And of course, as time goes on, it spread into all parts of the planet because of, that's another 5-hour discussion. But
I know.
but we can use the basis of that to move to the position that we're looking to find. And I think that's, I think we both agree on that. And I think that's really but how do we educate others? And knowing that many others don't, you and I listen to artists, we read, we listen, we look at artists, we understand, I view a piece of poetry as much as important as a piece of legislation in terms of trying to understand the world.
Sometimes more important. Right?
Yeah, well, exactly. Benjamin Zephaniah in the UK. I grew up with him, and his language explained all this because, again, he managed to talk about these issues. But how do we then take that out into this world where people believe that legalization is the solution to the problem? And I put the word problem in inverted commas.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Because it's not a problem. It's
I know what you
right.
mean. I know what you mean. I think you're doing it already. What I think is that, and we're actually not bringing anything to people that they don't already have. That's how I see it. Like I'm saying, when the police are not around, you forget that it's illegal. When you think about the police, that's when you're like, oh, fuck this law. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's already, that's how we felt. That's how we feel when we're smoking or we're in this state, right? Like, this thing doesn't make sense. Then we start to shift to become what we're not and talk about this. And then, like I was saying earlier, you use these words, you got to make these words true. So you start to yourself in it.
We don't have much time left, but one of my favorite words, non-favorite words that people use at the moment is stigma. When I smoke a spliff, I have no stigma. It's just like, what's it got to do with anybody? I've never had stigma. The first time is like, this suits me. This is for my body. I have no stigma. I might be afraid of seeing a police officer if I just
don't want that.
You don't want that. But otherwise, when I'm just walking, I have no stigma about using this plant. It's been on the planet for however many tens of thousands of years. It's my right to use it. I don't care what you think. You have created law. My job is to help and work with other people to undo that knot, Gordian knot, I'd suggest, and make it a straight line of, well, nice hemp rope, I think would be a good
Love that.
analogy.
Great. So a couple of things before we leave, right? So you're talking about rights, right? And we're just talking about Judge Ventus is talking about it's a fundamental freedom, fundamental right that you don't have to, you don't need a law to deal with at all. Like some people, which means how we're living already, right? We don't need that law even to exist. Remove it all. It doesn't mean anything. But I was thinking that could be problematic if we start talking about rights, because you might mean one thing, but there's another idea about rights. It still defers to the state. You gave me the right, or you recognize that doesn't exist for some of us. Think of the people, the uncontacted people. You think they're thinking about rights? It's all made up stuff. This is all coming from Enlightenment talk. Yeah, I mean, we know Plato and Aristotle study those things. They're people over there, but it's coming from, this is only one way of looking at this thing. We could use other principles to take care of people's rights and some, rather than couching up ideas. And so the work that, one thing that happened in a lot of places where the people shot for sacramental legalization was we're talking about my religious rights, right? My sacramental right. It was a place where one brother found himself making up stuff. When you start talking about, you're not speaking your language anymore. Someone else decided what those things are. You were not there in that meeting, right? So you say all that. So the guy's in court and he's fighting for ganja to be free. And he's saying, Rasta women don't smoke. By trying to talk like we're responsible ganja users. Rasta women don't smoke, children don't smoke. It's not true. But that's why, because you wrap yourself up in a language that's not yours. You know what I mean? And now you get this pre-legalization. It sounds exciting. Post-legalization, you see that, man, you're frustrated. But in December, you're complaining in South Africa that, oh man, this is a messed up situation. The South African Human Rights Commission had to step in and release a document, like a press release, like referencing the situation with the cops in a serious way. Actually, look at this. Let's look at they were not even saying leave us alone forever. They were like, leave us alone this Christmas.
Yeah, well, I mean, and look, there's another court case coming up in South Africa fairly soon where he's challenging the existing, is it the Russ Gareth challenging the existing Cannabis Act. So it'll be interesting to see how the South African courts manage to see what he's saying and whether that affects the existing status quo.
It could. We got to end it. I know.
Well, I know we've got 4 minutes, so I think what we'll do is we're going to have another conversation, in maybe a month's time, and maybe after I've had this conversation with a few people at the conference as well. And we can come back and have another conversation about it, because this is an ongoing conversation, and the more of us that have it and share it and start talking in a different language, or at least challenging the existing languages.
You're going somewhere with that. And actually, I think go for the first one. Let's keep doing what we're doing, and the language will change.
Yeah,
we said legalize it because it was repeated a lot. If you repeat this a lot, it was
easy.
Normal.
It was easy thing to say, and it was easy for people to understand.
Yeah, I'll start saying it too, because I heard you say it. Or everywhere I turn, people are saying it. But if I say, "Oh man, you're already doing it, Sean,"
I know. I spoke to a South African lawyer who does a lot of environmental work, and he works with psychedelics. He works with cannabis, and he said something really interesting the other day. He said, "Our Human Rights Act doesn't stop at the skin. It should, and we need to explain that to people. It goes straight in here into the brain. That's where our human rights, are, and we should stop thinking about just the body. Human rights apply to the body; they apply to the mind. And once we understand that, we can then really start challenging a whole lot of things that exist now in the way that we deal with them. And look, these arguments are in development. And any argument is never finalized.
Always.
And that's what we need to do, is keep having this conversation.
Absolutely. So great talking to you. And I'd like to talk some more about rights too, because I'm
Yeah.
seeing it as a minefield. We got to be careful about.
Live and direct, live and a date, no jive.
Legalization. Coming how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.